Hi, I'm David Anderson, Director of Technology and Solutions Marketing with vArmour, and I'd like to take a few minutes to talk to you about vArmour and Cisco ACI. Let's just take a second here to talk about ACI and give an overview. So ACI is comprised really of two halves. You have the kind of the hardware, the infrastructure side, and then you have the software and the automation side of things. So within the hardware side, we have the concepts of spine switches and leaf switches. Usually the Nexus 9000 series switches is what we're talking about here. And then on the other side, we have the software piece, which in Cisco ACI is the Cisco APIC. And the APIC is actually the controller that allows us to automate things across our actual data center infrastructure. One of the benefits that people look at with ACI is around that network automation component. And what I can do here, just to expand on that a little bit, is I can actually start to orchestrate services and orchestrate capabilities across my ACI fabric using the Cisco APIC. The second thing that people look at is the scalability factor. So within the ACI infrastructure, I have very low latency, very high throughput physical infrastructure that can support high density virtualized environments, and I can do that at large scale across my entire enterprise data center environments. So that's kind of our second point. Our third point is around workload classification. ACI has the ability to actually group workloads together logically into containers called endpoint policy groups. And this endpoint policy group is usually a container that houses workloads based on the workload behavior, what types of application they're running, what their responsibility is. And so it's just a way to logically group those together. And that's called endpoint policy groups, or EPG, within ACI. Now those are some of the kind of the benefits that people directly use and leverage within ACI. While ACI can do some things well, there's also some limitations within ACI that I think we should just explore a little bit here as well. So if these are the benefits, let's talk a little bit about the limitations within ACI. So the first limit is really around incomplete visibility. And within ACI, I have a lot of information I can gather off of my infrastructure. I can look at latency information as flows across go across my physical infrastructure. I can look at the throughput, the bandwidth utilization, and all of these statistics as traffic flows across my physical infrastructure. However, I don't get a lot of great information within the virtual infrastructure. So when workloads sit within an EPG, maybe on the same hypervisor, I'm not able to see that application information between those workloads and that layer 7 information at all, and I'm only able to see some of the network flow information if traffic goes up and actually comes back down through my physical infrastructure within ACI. So I have very kind of incomplete visibility. I can see things as they cross the physical infrastructure, but I have trouble seeing things as they occur within my virtual environment. Within an EPG between workloads on a hypervisor is a great example of that. So the second thing that we kind of want to talk about is around hairpin segmentation. Now within ACI, in order to do segmentation between workloads within the same EPG on a hypervisor, I have to actually trombone that traffic up to my leaf switch and back down in order to do any type of segmentation here on my leaf switch. So now I have to send traffic back and forth across my leaf switch in order to do any types of enforcement to segment workloads within an EPG on a hypervisor. So that's kind of a limitation, and it's really not optimal to bounce that traffic back and forth up to my physical infrastructure. So the third point that we want to talk about is really around our limits within policy enforcement. Now within ACI, I'm really limited to layer 4 policy enforcement, which means that on my leaf switches, I can enforce based on layer 4 port. So if I want to open a port to port 80, I can do that. If I want to close it, I can do that, and all that's done kind of here on my leaf switches. That really doesn't give us the granular ability to go in and create policy for applications that are running within my environment. I simply open something, a pipe, or I close a pipe. And that's really the level of granularity I have here. So now let's take a look how vArmour inserts into this environment and actually can be leveraged to increase the overall capabilities within ACI and address some of these specific limits that we were just talking about. With vArmour, we're going in and we're inserting the vArmour enforcement points as a guest VM within the hypervisor. And each workload within the hypervisor is actually connecting to that vArmour enforcement point. Now, all of the traffic that goes in and out of the hypervisor, as well as between the workloads, is seen by that vArmour enforcement point. So now we are seeing full layer 7 visibility of all of the workload and application traffic within our virtual environment. So now we've gained a lot of visibility off the vArmour component that's sitting within this virtual infrastructure. So that kind of addresses the incomplete visibility piece. The second piece we want to talk about is around segmentation. So with vArmour, once we go in and we insert in the virtual environment and within the hypervisor, we're actually segmenting within each hypervisor and within each EPG. So if we go back to our workloads within a single EPG on a single hypervisor again, we actually can go in and isolate and segment these workloads within an EPG. That is all done locally within the hypervisor. Traffic doesn't need to go up to the physical infrastructure. We're actually doing this and doing local micro-segmentation within the hypervisor for workloads residing within the same EPG. So that kind of addresses that second point there. So if we take now a look at the third point around policy. So within vArmour, we're actually implementing layer 7 policy enforcement locally within each hypervisor. This means that now I can go in and I can look at all of the application flow information within my environment, between my workloads, to and from my workloads, and I can enforce policy on that information. So now I'm doing layer 7 policy within vArmour, and I'll give you a great example of why that's useful. So let's say we have a workload that's running more than one application. Let's say it's running 3 applications. I can write a policy locally within that environment that basically either allows or denies specific communications within those applications, either to or from or between my workloads. That information actually can be utilized and enforced locally, and there's no hairpinning of traffic, number one. And number two is I get much more granular policy now within my virtual environment. I can look at layer 7 details between workloads within an EPG inside the hypervisor. And I create and leverage the vArmour distributed security capability so that once I create that policy actually is extended across my virtual infrastructure. So now if I move workloads around, that policy actually is supported across all of my environment. So that kind of addresses there our last bullet point that we were talking about. Now let's just take a quick look at the automation of things. So with APIC, you're controlling different functions across the ACI infrastructure and automating certain processes. vArmour, it's API driven, and because of its open API, actually ties into APIC, and now we can automate vArmour security within APIC and utilize that across our entire ACI infrastructure. So now we have full layer 7 visibility, micro-segmentation within each hypervisor, within an EPG, all localized within that virtual environment, and we can enforce layer 7 application-based policies within this environment and get very detailed granular policies established across our entire data center due to the fact that we have a distributed security architecture that mirrors that policy across our virtual infrastructure. And we can also automate that entire process with APIC across our entire ACI fabric. Thanks for listening and joining. I'm David Anderson with vArmour.